Hello everyone, welcome back to Buried Files. Tonight we bring you 7 deeply disturbing true camping horror stories that will make you question what really happens when you venture into the wilderness alone. These are not fictional tales spun for entertainment, but authentic encounters shared by real people who experience the unthinkable in places most of us will never dare to visit. Each account has been carefully documented and verified through first-hand testimonials and corroborating evidence. The wilderness holds mysteries that defy rational explanation. And tonight you will hear directly from those who survived encounters that changed them forever. If you appreciate genuine horror content that exposes the dark realities lurking beyond civilization, subscribe to Buried Files and hit the notification bell so you never miss our investigations into the unexplained. After you finish listening to these harrowing accounts, we want to hear from you in the comments below about your own experiences with the unknown. Now settle in as we explore the terrifying truth about what waits in the woods when the sun goes down. Camilla came from the kind of family that believed the outdoors could cure almost anything. Her father had been a wilderness guide before he settled into office work, and he had made sure his daughter knew how to read a compass, pitch a tent in the rain, and start a fire without matches before she turned 10. Every summer of her childhood had been punctuated by camping trips to national parks across the western United States. By the time Camilla turned 19, she felt more comfortable sleeping under the stars than she did in her college dormitory. The decision to attempt her first solo camping trip came during spring break of her sophomore year. Most of her friends were heading to beaches or visiting family. But Camilla craved something different. She wanted to prove to herself that she could handle the wilderness alone, that all those years of training with her father had prepared her for true independence. She chose a trail system in the Cascade Mountains, a moderately difficult route that promised stunning views and relative solitude. The plan was simple: 3 days and 2 nights. A 12-mile loop that would bring her back to her starting point. She spent 2 weeks preparing. She checked and rechecked her gear, studied maps until she could visualize every switchback and water source, and informed her parents of her exact itinerary. Her father made her promise to check in via satellite messenger every 12 hours. Her mother packed extra first aid supplies and made her swear to turn back at the first sign of trouble. Camilla promised everything they asked, confident that nothing would go wrong. The morning she arrived at the trailhead, the parking lot was nearly empty. It was a Tuesday in late March, still early in the season, and most serious hikers were waiting for the snow to clear from higher elevations. Camilla pulled into a space near the trail marker, killed her engine, and sat for a moment, breathing in the pine-scented air through her open window. This was it. Her adventure was beginning. She was pulling her backpack from the trunk when she heard footsteps on gravel behind her. She turned to find a man approaching, probably in his early 40s, wearing hiking boots and a faded green jacket. He had the kind of face that could have been friendly under different circumstances. But something about his smile made Camilla's stomach tighten. It was too wide, too eager, and it did not quite reach his eyes. "Heading out alone?" he asked, stopping a few feet away from her car. His gaze moved from her face to her backpack, to her car and back again, cataloging details in a way that felt invasive. Camilla forced a polite smile. "Just doing a day hike," she lied. Her backpack was clearly too large for a day trip, but she hoped he would not notice or would not care. "Which trail?" He stepped closer. Camilla could smell coffee on his breath. "I have not decided yet," she said, shouldering her pack. "Just going to see where the mood takes me." "Pretty area," the man continued, apparently unbothered by her short answers. "I come here a lot. Been hiking these mountains for years. Where are you planning to camp tonight?" The question sent a chill down her spine. He had seen through her day hike excuse immediately, and now he wanted to know exactly where she would be sleeping. Every instinct her father had ever taught her started screaming warnings. "My boyfriend is meeting me at one of the established sites," Camilla said, making her voice as casual as possible. "He is running late, so I figured I would start without him." The man's smile faltered for just a second. "Boyfriend? That is nice. Which site?" "I am not sure of the name," Camilla said, backing toward the trailhead. "We are still figuring it out. Nice talking to you." She did not wait for his response. She turned and walked quickly toward the trail, resisting the urge to run. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She told herself she was overreacting, that the man was probably just a friendly hiker trying to make conversation. But her hands were shaking as she clipped her pack's waist belt. The first mile of the trail wound through dense forest, the path soft with pine needles and last season's fallen leaves. Camilla walked faster than she normally would have, glancing over her shoulder every few minutes. She saw no one. The forest was silent, except for the occasional bird call and the whisper of wind through the branches above. Gradually, her heartbeat slowed. She started to feel foolish for her paranoia. By the time she reached the 3-mile marker, she had nearly forgotten about the man in the parking lot. The trail had climbed steadily, and she emerged from the tree line to find herself on a ridge with a view that stole her breath. Mountains stretched in every direction, their peaks still white with snow. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals in lazy spirals. This was why she had come. This moment of pure connection with something larger than herself. She consulted her map and decided to make camp near a creek approximately half a mile ahead. The terrain looked perfect, a small clearing near water with good tree coverage and relatively flat ground. She reached it just after 2 in the afternoon, giving herself plenty of time to set up before dark. The clearing was even better than she had hoped. The creek burbled over smooth stones, clear and cold. A fire ring made of blackened rocks indicated that others had camped here before, though there was no recent trash or evidence of occupation. Camilla dropped her pack and started the familiar routine of setting up camp. She pitched her tent on level ground, hung her food bag from a high branch to keep it away from bears, and gathered firewood from the surrounding forest. It was while she was collecting wood that she noticed the boot prints. They were pressed into the soft earth near the creek bank, clearly recent. Adult-sized, probably male based on the size. That was not unusual. Other hikers used this area. But as Camilla followed the prints with her eyes, she realized they formed a complete circle around her campsite. Someone had walked the entire perimeter of the clearing, stepping carefully, deliberately, as if surveying the space. Camilla told herself it meant nothing. Another hiker had probably scouted this spot and decided to camp elsewhere. But the prints looked fresh, probably from that morning, and she had not passed anyone on the trail. She pushed the thought away and focused on building her fire. Dinner was freeze-dried beef stew, rehydrated with creek water she had filtered and boiled. She ate slowly, watching the sun sink behind the mountains and paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. As darkness settled over the forest, she activated her satellite messenger and sent her parents the pre-arranged check-in message. Day 1 complete, all good. Made camp at coordinates previously discussed, weather clear. Her father's response came within minutes. Proud of you, kiddo. Stay safe. Check in tomorrow morning." Camilla smiled and tucked the device into her jacket pocket. She added more wood to the fire and settled in to read by headlamp, a thriller she had been saving for this trip. The irony of reading about fictional danger while camping alone in the wilderness was not lost on her. She read for an hour, until her eyes grew heavy. The fire had burned down onto glowing coals. She doused it thoroughly with creek water, double-checked that her food bag was secure, and retreated to her tent. She changed into sleep clothes, crawled into her sleeping bag, and listened to the night sounds of the forest. Owls called in the distance. Something small rustled through the underbrush nearby, probably a mouse or vole. The creek continued its endless murmur. Camilla was drifting off when she heard the footsteps. They were careful, measured, the sound of someone trying to walk quietly, but not quite succeeding. Boots on dead leaves. She froze, barely breathing, every muscle tense. The footsteps circled her tent slowly. She could track their progress by sound alone. They passed the door of her tent, moved around the back, came up the other side. Then they stopped. Silence pressed in, heavier than before. Camilla's hand crept toward the canister of bear spray she kept next to her sleeping bag. Her fingers closed around the cold metal. She waited, straining to hear anything over the pounding of her own heart. The sound of a zipper being opened cut through the quiet. Not her tent zipper, something else. Then she remembered. Her backpack. She had left it outside near the dead fire ring, a rookie mistake she had made because she was tired and had felt safe. Camilla heard the distinctive rustle of someone going through her belongings. She heard the plastic crinkle of her trash bag, the metallic clink of her cookware, the soft thud of items being set on the ground. Whoever was out there was methodically searching through her things. Her mind raced. Should she yell? Confront them? Stay silent and hope they left? She shifted position slowly, trying to see through the mesh window at the top of her tent. The moon was nearly full, providing enough light to make out shapes. She saw the silhouette of a man crouched by her backpack, his back to her tent. He was wearing a green jacket. The man from the parking lot had followed her. He had hiked 3 miles into the wilderness and waited for darkness to search her belongings. The realization hit her like ice water. He knew she was alone. He had lied in wait. And now he was between her and the trail back to civilization. She heard him stand, heard him step closer to her tent. Then she heard his voice, soft and conversational, as if he were talking to himself or to someone who was not there. "Nobody knows she is here," he said. "She told me herself. No boyfriend. She's all alone." Camilla's terror crystallized into cold clarity. She had 2 choices: hide in her tent and hope he left, or act first while she still had the element of surprise. Her father's voice echoed in her memory from one of their training sessions years ago. "If you are in real danger, do not hesitate. Do not negotiate. Act decisively and run." She gripped the bear spray, aimed it at the tent door, and burst through the opening. The man was standing less than 6 feet away, his eyes wide with shock. Camilla did not give him time to react. She pressed the trigger and sprayed him directly in the face. He screamed and stumbled backward, hands clawing at his eyes. Camilla did not wait to see what happened next. She still wore her hiking boots, had pulled them on in her sleeping bag in case she needed to make a quick exit. She grabbed her jacket, her phone from the tent pocket, and her knife from her belt, and she ran. Not down the trail toward the parking lot, because he might follow, and she was not confident she could outrun him for 3 miles in the dark. Instead, she ran perpendicular to the trail, into the dense forest, putting as much distance as possible between herself and the man. She ran until her lungs burned, until branches whipped her face and arms, until she tripped over a root and went down hard on her hands and knees. She scrambled behind a fallen log and crouched there, gasping for breath, listening for sounds of pursuit. She heard him crashing through the forest behind her, cursing, calling out. "I just wanted to talk," he shouted, his voice raw and desperate. "I was not going to hurt you. Come back." Camilla stayed silent, pressing herself against the log, making herself as small as possible. The man's voice grew more distant. He was moving in the wrong direction. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the forest fell silent again. She waited until the moon moved visibly across the sky before she dared to move. She pulled out her phone, but there was no signal this deep. In the mountains, her satellite messenger was still in her tent. She had nothing but the clothes she wore, a knife, and her wits. Camilla made a decision. She could not go back to her camp, and she could not risk the main trail. But she knew these mountains ran roughly north to south, and she knew that a ranger station sat at the northern trailhead, approximately 8 miles from where she had started. If she moved parallel to the trail system, staying in the forest but following the general direction of the ridgeline, she would eventually intersect with the access road that led to the ranger station. She walked through the night, using the moon and stars to navigate, moving as quietly as she could manage. Every sound made her freeze, certain the man had found her. But she encountered nothing more threatening than a doe and her fawn that bounded away into the darkness. Dawn found her exhausted, scratched, and disoriented, but still moving. The forest began to thin. She heard the distant sound of a vehicle engine. 20 minutes later, she stumbled out of the tree line and onto a gravel road. She followed it north and found herself standing in front of a small log building with a sign that read, "Cascade Mountain Ranger Station." The ranger on duty took one look at her torn clothes, bleeding scratches, and wild eyes, and immediately called for backup. Camilla told her story between sips of hot coffee, her hands still shaking. The ranger's expression grew darker with every detail. "Can you describe him?" the ranger asked when Camilla finished. She did, down to the faded green jacket and the way his smile did not reach his eyes. The ranger was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled out a file folder and laid several photographs on the table. "Is he one of these men?" Camilla scanned the photos. On the third one, she froze. "That is him. That is the man from the parking lot." The ranger nodded grimly. "His name is Derek Milhouse. He has been a person of interest in 3 disappearances over the past 2 years. All young women, all solo hikers in this mountain range. We have had witnesses place him at various trailheads, always talking to women who are hiking alone. But we have never had enough evidence to arrest him." Camilla's blood turned to ice. "Did they find the women?" "No," the ranger said quietly. "We have never found them." The ranger station became a hub of activity over the next several hours. Police arrived. Search teams were dispatched to Camilla's campsite and the surrounding area. They found her tent and belongings undisturbed except for her rifled backpack. They found boot prints matching Derek Milhouse's known shoe size. They found evidence that he had been camped approximately 200 yards from Camilla's site, hidden in thick brush, waiting and watching. But they did not find Derek Milhouse. He had vanished into the mountains as if he had never existed. Camilla stayed with her parents for 2 weeks after that night. She had nightmares every time she closed her eyes, visions of green jackets and 2 wide smiles in tents surrounded by circling footsteps. The police called periodically with updates. They had found Milhouse's car abandoned at a different trailhead 40 miles away. They had issued a warrant for his arrest, They were still searching, but weeks turned into months, and Derek Milhouse remained at large. Camilla started camping again eventually, because she refused to let fear steal something she loved. But she never went alone. She joined hiking groups, went with friends, always made sure someone knew exactly where she was. And sometimes, late at night when she could not sleep, she thought about those 3 missing women. She wondered if they had met Derek Milhouse at trailheads. She wondered if they had noticed his smile did not reach his eyes. She wondered if they had heard his footsteps outside their tents in the darkness. And she wondered, with a sick certainty that made her stomach turn, whether she was the only one who had been lucky enough to run fast enough, far enough, to survive. Gabriel had always been the type of person who needed proof before he believed anything. As a graduate student in wildlife biology, he had spent 5 years studying animal behavior through the lens of empirical evidence and scientific methodology. Ghost stories were entertaining, certainly, but they belonged in the same category as fairy tales and urban legends. Cultural artifacts that revealed more about human psychology than actual supernatural phenomena. His thesis focused on nocturnal predator patterns in the Appalachian Mountains, specifically how apex predators like bobcats and black bears adjusted their hunting behaviors based on seasonal changes and human encroachment. The research required extensive fieldwork, which meant spending weeks at a time camping in remote wilderness areas, setting up camera traps, recording audio, and documenting animal tracks and scat. Gabriel had done this work for 3 years without incident. The forest held no mysteries for him, only data waiting to be collected and analyzed. The trip that changed everything began in late October. Gabriel had secured permission to conduct research in a particularly isolated section of the Appalachian Range in eastern Kentucky, an area that saw fewer than a dozen hikers per year due to its difficult terrain and lack of maintained trails. The ranger who issued his permit had given him an odd look when he explained his research plans. "You are going alone?" the ranger asked. "I always work alone," Gabriel replied. "Fewer variables to account for." The ranger had nodded slowly. "Just be careful up there. That area has a reputation." Gabriel smiled politely. Every remote area had a reputation. People loved to project their fears onto the wilderness, to populate the darkness with monsters, rather than acknowledge that nature was simply indifferent to human existence. "I will be fine," he assured the ranger. "I have done this dozens of times." The hike to his research site took 6 hours, a brutal climb through dense undergrowth and across rocky streams. Gabriel made camp in a small clearing he had identified through satellite imagery, a relatively flat area surrounded by old-growth forest. He spent the remainder of the daylight hours setting up his equipment, positioning motion-activated cameras along game trails, hanging audio recorders from tree branches, and marking GPS coordinates for each device. The first 2 nights were exactly what he expected. His cameras captured footage of white-tailed deer, a family of raccoons, and what appeared to be a young black bear. His audio recorders picked up the typical soundscape of the autumn forest. Owls calling, coyotes yipping in the distance, the rustle of small mammals moving through the leaf litter. Gabriel reviewed his data each morning with satisfaction. This was going to be an excellent addition to his thesis. On the 3rd night, everything changed. Gabriel woke at 2:47 a.m. to absolute silence. Not the peaceful quiet of a sleeping forest, but a complete absence of sound that felt unnatural, oppressive. No insects, no wind, no distant animal calls. It was as if someone had placed the entire mountain under a soundproof dome. He unzipped his tent and looked out. Fog had rolled into the valley, so thick he could barely see the trees 10 feet from his campsite. That alone was strange. The weather forecast had called for clear skies all week, and fog typically formed in the early morning hours, not in the middle of the night. This fog seemed to have appeared instantaneously, and it moved in ways that fog should not move, swirling in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Gabriel grabbed his flashlight and stepped out of his tent. The fog closed around him immediately, damp and cold against his skin. He walked toward the nearest camera trap to check if it was still functioning. The device appeared fine, its indicator light blinking steadily. But when he pressed the button to review the most recent footage, the screen showed only static. Frowning, he checked the next camera. Same result. Static. He checked his audio recorders. The playback was nothing but white noise, a hissing that hurt his ears even at low volume. Every piece of equipment he had carefully calibrated and tested was malfunctioning simultaneously. Gabriel tried to rationalize it. Some kind of electromagnetic interference, perhaps. A solar flare or atmospheric anomaly. But even as he formulated these explanations, a part of his mind rejected them. This felt wrong in a way that had nothing to do with science. He heard it then. A sound emerging from the fog, rhythmic and metallic, like someone tapping two rocks together in a steady pattern. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. It came from his left, somewhere beyond the range of his flashlight beam. Gabriel turned toward it, training his light into the fog, but the beam seemed to die after a few feet, swallowed by the thick mist. "Hello?" he called out. His voice sounded flat, muffled. "Is someone there?" The tapping stopped. For a moment, there was only silence again. Then he heard something else. Whispers. Multiple voices speaking in unison, the words blending together into an incomprehensible murmur. The language was nothing Gabriel recognized, though he spoke 3 languages fluently and could identify dozens more. This sounded older than language, like wind through a canyon or water over stones, but unmistakably voice-like. Gabriel's heart began to beat faster. He was not afraid, he told himself. This was some kind of auditory illusion, a trick of acoustics in the fog. Mountain ranges were known for strange echoes and sound distortions. There was a logical explanation. The whispers grew louder, closer, coming from multiple directions now. Gabriel spun in a slow circle, sweeping his flashlight across his campsite. The beam caught movement in his peripheral vision. He turned sharply and saw a figure standing at the edge of the clearing. It was tall, impossibly tall, at least 7 feet, and thin, too thin. The proportions were all wrong. Arms that hung too low, legs that seemed to bend at angles that defied anatomy. Gabriel could not make out details through the fog, but he could see the silhouette, dark against the gray mist, motionless and watching. "Who are you?" Gabriel demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. "This is a research site. You are not supposed to be here." The figure did not respond. It did not move. It simply stood there. And Gabriel had the overwhelming sensation of being studied, examined, the way he examined the animals he photographed. He was the specimen now. Gabriel took a step backward toward his tent. The figure glided forward, not walking but moving smoothly, as if it floated just above the ground. Gabriel's scientific mind screamed at him that this was impossible, that he was experiencing some kind of hallucination brought on by isolation or contaminated water. But his instincts, the ancient part of his brain that predated logic and reason, told him to run. He did not run. He stood his ground, raised his flashlight, and aimed it directly at the figure. The beam hit the fog and bent, curving around the shape as if repelled by some invisible force. The light would not touch it. Gabriel watched in horror as the beam literally curved away, illuminating the trees behind the figure but leaving it in shadow. The whispers intensified, becoming almost deafening. And then Gabriel heard something new. Crying. A child crying, sobbing with heartbreak and terror. The sound came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing through the fog-shrouded forest. Gabriel broke. Every rational thought fled his mind. He scrambled backward, stumbled into his tent, and began kicking at the walls, screaming wordlessly. The figure continued its approach, now only feet from his tent. He could hear breathing, wet and rattling, like fluid in damaged lungs. The tent zipper began to open, slowly, deliberately, pulled by something outside. Gabriel watched the slider move along the track, inch by inch, revealing more of the fog beyond. He could see a hand now, if it was a hand, something too long and too pale, reaching through the opening. Gabriel screamed again, kicked with both feet at the tent wall opposite the door. The fabric tore. He scrambled through the opening, tearing the hole larger, and ran blindly into the fog. Branches whipped his face. He tripped over roots and rocks, but kept moving, driven by pure terror. No destination in mind, except away. He ran until his lungs felt like they would burst, until his legs gave out, and he collapsed against a tree trunk. He crouched there, gasping for breath, listening. The whispers had stopped. The crying had stopped. The breathing had stopped. Gradually, the fog began to thin. Gabriel looked up and saw stars appearing through gaps in the mist. Within minutes, the fog had dissipated completely, as impossibly fast as it had arrived. The forest sounds returned. Insects chirping, an owl hooting in the distance. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. Gabriel stayed where he was until dawn, too terrified to move. When sunlight finally filtered through the canopy, he made his way back to his campsite. His tent was undamaged. The zipper he had watched opening was closed. There were no footprints in the soft earth around his camp, no evidence that anything had been there except for him. But his equipment told a different story. Every single camera trap had been destroyed, not damaged by weather or animals, but torn apart as if by massive hands. The plastic casings were cracked and splintered. The lenses were shattered. The metal mounting brackets were bent and twisted. Gabriel's audio recorders hung from their tree branches, but when he examined them, he found the memory cards missing from every single unit. And there was one more thing. Around his tent, pressed into the soft earth, was a perfect circle of dead grass. The circle was approximately 15 feet in diameter with his tent at the exact center. Within the circle, every blade of grass, every small plant, every living thing had turned brown and brittle, as if all life had been drained from the soil. Gabriel packed his remaining belongings with shaking hands and hiked out that morning. He did not file a report about his damaged equipment. He did not tell his thesis advisor what had happened. He simply requested a change of research location and a new topic. A month later, against his better judgment, he returned to the site with 2 colleagues, telling them only that he wanted to verify some unusual data. The dead circle was still there. His colleagues examined it, took soil samples, photographed it from multiple angles. They theorized about fungal infections, chemical spills, lightning strikes. Gabriel let them theorize. He did not tell them the truth. The soil samples came back from the lab inconclusive. No fungus, no contamination, no radiation, no explanation whatsoever for why every living thing in that perfect circle had died simultaneously. Gabriel submitted his thesis the following spring, using data from a different location and a different research question. He earned his doctorate and accepted a position at a university in the Midwest, far from any mountains. He published papers, taught classes, and built a respectable career. But he never went camping again. And he never called himself a skeptic, because skepticism required the belief that everything could be explained, that the universe operated according to knowable rules. Gabriel now understood that there were things in the wilderness that did not operate according to any rules humans understood. There were things that existed in the spaces between explanation and belief, in the fog that appeared from nowhere, in the silence that swallowed sound. Sometimes, late at night when he could not sleep, Gabriel would remember the figure at the edge of his campsite. He would remember the impossible height, the way it moved without walking, the way his light bent around it. And he would remember the breathing, wet and rattling, and wonder what would have happened if he had not run, if he had stayed in that tent and let the zipper finish opening. He never wanted to know the answer. Some knowledge, he had learned, was worse than ignorance. Some questions were better left unasked, and some places in the wilderness were meant to remain unexplored, not because they held no secrets, but because the secrets they held were never meant for human understanding. Riley had grown up in a small mountain town in western North Carolina, where everybody knew everybody, and the wilderness was not something to fear, but something to respect. Her family had owned the same property for 4 generations, 200 acres of forest land that bordered the Pisgah National Forest. She had spent her entire childhood exploring those woods, building forts in the hollows, fishing in the creek that ran through the property, and camping under the stars with her cousins every summer. By the time she turned 16, Riley knew those woods better than she knew the hallways of her high school. She could identify trees by their bark, track deer by their prints, and navigate back to her house from anywhere on the property without a compass. The forest was her second home, and she had never experienced anything there that frightened her. Until the night she and her friends decided to ignore the warnings. The warnings had always been there, woven into family conversations and casual remarks from the older generations. Riley's grandmother would mention in passing that certain areas of the woods were best avoided after dark. Her grandfather would change the subject whenever anyone asked why the old logging road that cut through the northern section of the property had been abandoned decades ago. Her parents would get a particular look on their faces when she mentioned camping too far from the house, a tightness around their eyes that suggested they knew something they were not sharing. Riley had always assumed these warnings were just superstition, the kind of folklore that accumulated in rural communities over generations. But one evening in late September, when she mentioned to her grandmother that she and some friends were planning to camp near the old logging road, the elderly woman's reaction was immediate and severe. "You will not," her grandmother said flatly. "You will camp somewhere else." "Why?" Riley asked, genuinely curious now. "What is wrong with that area?" Her grandmother was silent for a long moment, her weathered hand still in her lap. "There are some places," she finally said, "where people hear things they should not hear, things that call to them. You stay away from that road, Riley. You hear me?" But Riley was 16, and 16-year-olds rarely listen when their curiosity is sparked. She shared her grandmother's warning with her friends Andrew and Lily, and they all agreed it sounded like typical old people paranoia. What harm could come from camping a mile from her house on her own family's property? They made their plans, packed their gear, and told Riley's parents they would be camping at the usual spot near the creek. They lied. They hiked to the old logging road instead. The road was barely visible anymore, overgrown with saplings and carpeted with decades of leaf litter. It cut through a section of forest that felt different from the rest of the property, though Riley could not articulate exactly how. The trees seemed older here, more twisted, their branches creating a canopy so dense that even in late afternoon, the light was dim and green-tinged. They set up camp in a clearing about 50 yards from where the road disappeared into the thickest part of the forest. Andrew built a fire while Lily and Riley pitched the tent they would share. The boys had brought their own tent, and they set it up on the opposite side of the fire ring. By the time darkness fell, they had a good blaze going and were roasting hot dogs on sharpened sticks, laughing and telling stories like they had done dozens of times before. Nothing felt wrong, not at first. They ate their dinner, played cards by flashlight, and settled into the comfortable rhythms of camping. Around 11, Lily went to the tent to sleep. The others stayed by the fire, talking in the low voices people use when they are surrounded by darkness and trying not to disturb it. Riley was starting to feel drowsy, considering turning in herself, when she heard it. Singing. A woman's voice, clear and beautiful, carrying through the night air from somewhere deeper in the forest. The melody was unfamiliar, but haunting, the kind of tune that immediately lodged itself in your memory. But it was the language that made Riley's skin prickle. The words were in no language she recognized, syllables that seemed to flow together like water, rising and falling in patterns that felt ancient. "Do you hear that?" she whispered to Andrew. Andrew was staring into the darkness, his expression blank. "Yeah," he said. "I hear it." The singing continued, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. It was impossible to pinpoint a direction. Sometimes it sounded close, as if the singer was just beyond the firelight. Other times it seemed to drift from miles away, but it never stopped, never paused for breath, just continued in an endless loop of melody. Riley felt an overwhelming urge to find the source. She stood up, her eyes searching the tree line, and noticed that Andrew had also risen to his feet. He was walking toward the forest, his movements slow and dreamlike, as if moving through water. "Andrew?" Riley called. He did not respond. He kept walking, his arms loose at his sides, his face completely expressionless. He walked past the edge of the firelight and into the darkness beyond. Riley ran after him. She grabbed his arm and tried to pull him back, but he was stronger than she expected. He shook her off without even looking at her and continued walking. The singing grew louder, more insistent, and Andrew moved toward it like a moth drawn to flame. "Lily!" Riley screamed. "Help me!" Lily burst from the tent, saw what was happening, and immediately grabbed Andrew's other arm. Together, they pulled, but Andrew fought them with a strength that seemed impossible for someone his size. He thrashed and twisted, trying to break free, his eyes unfocused and distant. He did not speak, did not acknowledge them, just struggled to reach the singing that continued to pour through the darkness. They managed to drag him back to the fire. Riley wrapped her arms around his chest from behind, while Lily held his legs. He bucked and writhed, making sounds deep in his throat that were not quite words. His skin was burning hot to the touch, fever hot, and sweat poured down his face. The singing changed. It was no longer beautiful. It became harsh, discordant, angry. The melody twisted into something that hurt to hear, notes that seemed to scrape against the inside of Riley's skull. The forest around them came alive with the sound, trees creaking and groaning as if in response, branches rustling though there was no wind. Riley did not know how long they held Andrew. It felt like hours. Her muscles screamed with exhaustion. Andrew's struggles grew weaker, but never stopped completely. Lily was crying, begging Andrew to snap out of it, but he gave no sign of hearing her. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the singing stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. Andrew went limp in their arms, his eyes rolled back, and he collapsed. They lowered him to the ground, terrified they had hurt him. But he was breathing steadily, deeply, as if he had fallen into a natural sleep. They did not sleep that night. They kept the fire blazing and took turns watching Andrew, who did not wake until dawn. When he finally opened his eyes, he looked around in confusion. "What happened?" he asked. "Why am I on the ground?" Riley and Lily exchanged glances. "You do not remember?" Riley asked carefully. "Remember what?" Andrew sat up, wincing. "I remember sitting by the fire, and then nothing. Why does my whole body hurt?" They told him what had happened. Andrew listened with growing horror, touching his arms where bruises were already forming from where they had held him. He had no memory of the singing, no memory of trying to walk into the forest, no memory of fighting them. The last 3 hours had been completely erased from his mind. They packed up immediately and hiked back to Riley's house. By the time they arrived, Andrew was running a fever. His mother took him to the doctor, who could find nothing wrong except a temperature of 102 degrees. The fever lasted 3 days. Andrew spent those days in bed, delirious, speaking in fragments that made no sense. Riley visited once and heard him mumbling in his sleep, words in that same strange language they had heard in the singing. On the 4th day, the fever broke. Andrew recovered completely with no lasting effects except a profound unease whenever anyone mentioned camping. He refused to talk about what had happened, and after a few attempts, Riley and Lily stopped asking. Riley finally confronted her grandmother a week later, told her everything. The old woman listened without interruption, her face growing graver with each detail. When Riley finished, her grandmother was quiet for a long time. "There is a story," she finally said, "that my grandmother told me. Back in the 1930s, during the Depression, a woman lived in a cabin near that logging road. She had a baby boy, just a few months old. One winter, the baby disappeared. Some said he wandered off. Others said an animal took him. The woman searched for weeks, walking through the forest, singing lullabies, hoping the baby would hear her voice and cry out so she could find him." Riley felt cold spreading through her chest. "Did she find him?" Her grandmother shook her head. "They found her body 3 months later, frozen in the snow near the old road. But they never found the child. And people said, even after she died, they could hear her singing in those woods at night, singing her lullabies, still searching." "That is just a story, though," Riley said, though she did not believe her own words. "Right?" "Over the years," her grandmother continued, as if Riley had not spoken, "7 young men have gone missing from that area, all of them teenagers or in their early 20s. All of them after people reported hearing singing in the woods. They would wander off, and search parties would find no trace. Some folks say the woman is still looking for her baby. Some say she does not know what she's looking for anymore, just knows she lost something precious. And some say she sees young men and thinks, maybe this time, maybe this one is the child she lost." Riley thought about Andrew's blank eyes, his supernatural strength, the way he had fought to reach the singing. "What happens if they reach her?" she asked quietly. Her grandmother's expression was grim. "Nobody who reaches her ever comes back to tell us." Riley never camped in those woods again. She moved away for college and only returned home for holidays. But sometimes, late at night when the wind was right, she would hear singing drifting from the direction of the old logging road. She would close her windows and turn up the television, trying to drown out the sound. And she would think about Andrew's lost 3 hours, the time he could not remember, and wonder what he had seen or experienced during those moments when something else had control of his mind. He never talked about it. But sometimes Riley caught him staring into the distance with an expression that suggested he remembered more than he admitted. That something from that night still called to him. That part of him was still walking toward the singing in the darkness, and always would be. Caleb had been leading wilderness expeditions for 7 years, and in that time, he had developed a reputation for being both knowledgeable and cautious. He knew the backcountry of the Pacific Northwest better than most people knew their own neighborhoods. He understood weather patterns, could identify edible plants, knew how to navigate by stars and moss and the way water flowed. More importantly, he knew how to keep people safe in environments that did not care whether they lived or died. His philosophy was simple. Respect the wilderness, and it would tolerate your presence. Disrespect it, and you would pay the price. He taught his clients to leave no trace, to move through the forest as quietly as possible, and to never, under any circumstances, disturb things they did not understand. Nature had its own order, its own rules, and humans were guests who needed to remember their place. The expedition that changed everything started like any other. 6 clients had paid for a 5-day guided camping trip through the Cascade Wilderness, an area of old-growth forest that few people ever saw. The group was diverse. 2 couples in their 30s looking for adventure, and 2 solo hikers, Wyatt, a college student on summer break, and a retired schoolteacher named Margaret. They seemed like a good group, experienced enough to handle the terrain, but not so cocky that they would take unnecessary risks. The first day went smoothly. They hiked 8 miles, following a trail that wound through dense stands of Douglas fir and western red cedar. Caleb pointed out animal tracks, identified bird calls, and shared stories about the history of the area. They made camp near a stream, cooked dinner over a fire, and settled in for the night with the satisfaction that comes from a day well spent outdoors. The second day started well enough. They broke camp after breakfast and continued deeper into the wilderness, following a route Caleb had used several times before. But around midday, Wyatt called out from the front of the line, "Hey, Caleb, there is something weird up here." Caleb moved forward to where Wyatt stood at the edge of a clearing. The clearing itself was unusual. Perfectly circular, approximately 30 feet in diameter, with no trees growing within its boundaries. But what caught Caleb's attention was what stood in the center. It was a structure, though calling it that felt generous. Someone had constructed a framework of branches woven together in intricate patterns, forming a rough pyramid about 4 feet tall. Hanging from the branches were bones. Small animal bones, probably from rabbits and squirrels, as well as bundles of dried herbs, strips of bark tied with grass, and small carved figures made from wood. Around the base of the structure were offerings, wildflowers arranged in patterns, smooth river stones stacked in careful piles, and what appeared to be food items, though they were too old to identify specifically. The Halfer entire group had gathered now, staring at the structure with a mixture of curiosity and unease. Caleb felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. He had never seen this clearing before, despite having hiked this area multiple times, and he had certainly never seen anything like this structure. "What is it?" Margaret asked quietly. "Some kind of art installation?" "No," Caleb said. "This is not on any map, and we are miles from any maintained trail. Whoever built this came here specifically for this purpose." "It looks like some kind of altar," one of the other clients said, "like something for a ritual." Caleb nodded slowly. He knew enough about the history of the Pacific Northwest to understand that indigenous peoples had performed ceremonies in these forests for thousands of years. There were sacred places throughout the mountains, locations where offerings were made to spirits believed to protect the land. But those sites were usually documented, protected. This felt different. This felt active. "We should not be here," Caleb said firmly. "We are going to walk around this clearing and continue on our route. Nobody touches anything. Nobody takes anything. We leave it exactly as we found it. Understood?" Everyone nodded except Wyatt, who was staring at the structure with a smirk on his face. "Come on, man. It is just some sticks and dead flowers. You are not seriously buying into this mystical nonsense, are you?" "I am serious about respecting things we do not understand," Caleb said, meeting Wyatt's eyes. "We are leaving. Now." They had walked perhaps 10 feet when Wyatt laughed and jogged back into the clearing. Before Caleb could stop him, the young man kicked one of the carved wooden figures, sending it tumbling across the grass. "Wyatt!" Caleb shouted. "What the hell are you doing?" "Relax," Wyatt said, still grinning. "It is just superstitious garbage. Nobody is going to—" He stopped mid-sentence. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no insects, no wind. The air itself seemed to thicken, pressing against Caleb's skin like invisible hands. Every hair on his body stood on end. "We need to leave," Caleb said quietly. "Right now. Everyone back on the trail." They walked quickly, nobody speaking, the unnatural silence following them like a shadow. Caleb tried to tell himself it meant nothing, that the sudden quiet was coincidence, but he knew better. He had spent enough time in the wilderness to recognize when something was wrong. They made camp that evening in a different clearing, miles from the structure. Caleb built up the fire larger than usual and made sure everyone stayed close. As darkness fell, he noticed that the silence persisted. No owls called. No coyotes howled. The forest was holding its breath. "I do not feel good," Wyatt said around 9. He was sitting close to the fire, his face pale and slick with sweat. "I think I'm getting sick." By midnight, everyone was having the same nightmare. Caleb woke to the sound of Margaret screaming in her tent. Then one of the couples stumbled out of their tent, both of them shaking and crying. Within minutes, all 6 clients were awake and terrified, all describing the same dream. They had been standing in the clearing, surrounded by the figures made of branches and shadow, tall and impossibly thin. The figures had circled them slowly, speaking in voices that sounded like wind through dead leaves, demanding something. Wyatt had destroyed their offering, and now they wanted recompense. They wanted what was taken returned. They wanted respect shown. They wanted acknowledgement. Caleb had experienced the same dream, vivid enough that he could still feel the presence of those branch figures, could still hear their whispering demands. But more disturbing was the fact that all 7 of them had shared the identical vision. That was not possible. Dreams were private, personal, unless something else was at work. "Where is Wyatt?" Margaret asked suddenly. They searched the camp, calling his name. His tent was empty, his sleeping bag thrown aside. They found him 20 minutes later, standing in a small clearing about 200 yards from their campsite. He was completely unresponsive, staring straight ahead with unfocused eyes. And around him, arranged in a perfect circle, were dozens of dead birds, crows, jays, even a hawk, all lying on their backs with their wings spread. Caleb approached slowly, speaking Wyatt's name gently. The young man did not respond. Caleb touched his shoulder, and Wyatt's head turned mechanically. "They want it back," Wyatt said in a flat, emotionless voice. "They want what was taken. The offering must be restored." Caleb felt ice in his veins. What offering, Wyatt? The wooden figure? The carved figure, the offering of wood and respect. It must be returned, placed correctly. With new offerings, they are angry. They have been wronged. The other clients had gathered behind Caleb, all of them staring at the circle of dead birds. Nobody spoke. The wrongness of the moment pressed down on all of them, undeniable and terrifying. Caleb made a decision. He had spent his entire adult life being rational, being the person who explained away fears with logic and science. But there were some things that existed outside the boundaries of rational thought. Some things that demanded acknowledgement whether they fit into a scientific worldview or not. "Okay," he said to Wyatt. "Okay, we will fix it. We will make it right." He hiked back to the clearing alone, carrying his carving knife and a chunk of firewood. He spent 2 hours carving a replacement figure, trying to match the style of the one Wyatt had kicked. When it was finished, he placed it carefully at the base of the structure where the original had been. Then he added his own offerings: dried fruit from his pack, a handful of herbs he gathered from the forest, and a feather he found near the trail. He spoke aloud, feeling foolish but committed. "I apologize for the disrespect shown. The damage was not intentional malice, but ignorance. I have restored what was taken and added new offerings as a sign of respect. Please accept this and release your hold on the one who caused offense." The moment he finished speaking, sound returned to the forest. Birds began to sing. Insects buzzed. A breeze whispered through the trees. The oppressive weight that had been pressing down on the clearing lifted. Caleb hiked back to camp and found Wyatt sitting by the fire, conscious and confused. The young man had no memory of the night. No memory of standing in the circle of dead birds. No memory of speaking in that flat, emotionless voice. He was exhausted but otherwise unharmed. They broke camp at first light and hiked out a day early. Nobody complained. They were all eager to leave the wilderness behind, to return to a world that made sense. Caleb researched the area after that trip and found scattered references to indigenous ceremonies performed in those mountains for generations. The tribes that had lived there believed in forest spirits, protectors that demanded respect from anyone who entered their territory. Offerings were made to ensure safe passage. Disrespect was punished. He never led groups near that clearing again. He marked it on his private maps with a warning: "Sacred site, do not approach." And twice a year, in spring and autumn, he returned alone to leave offerings: food, carved wood, flowers. He did not know if it mattered, if anyone or anything received them. But he left them anyway. Because Caleb had learned something during that expedition that all his years of experience and education had not taught him. The wilderness was older than human understanding. It operated according to rules that predated science and logic. And some things, some places, demanded respect not because it made sense, but because the alternative was unthinkable. He thought about Wyatt sometimes, wondered if the young man remembered more than he admitted, wondered if something had changed in him during those lost hours. But mostly Caleb thought about the circle of dead birds, about shared nightmares, about voices like wind through dead leaves, making demands in the darkness. And he continued to leave his offerings, acknowledging powers he could not explain, respecting mysteries he would never understand. remembering that humans were guests in the wilderness, and guests who forgot their manners rarely received a second chance to learn. Eleanor had been planning her solo backpacking trip through the Sierra Nevada mountains for 6 months. She was 32 years old, a data analyst from Sacramento who spent 50 weeks a year behind a computer screen and lived for the 2 weeks when she could disconnect completely and lose herself in the wilderness. She was methodical in her preparation, the same way she was methodical about everything in her life. She studied topographic maps, researched weather patterns, downloaded trail GPS tracks, and created detailed itineraries that she filed with the ranger station before every trip. On July 12, 2019, she loaded her pack into her Subaru and drove 3 hours to the trailhead. The ranger who processed her permit was young, maybe early 20s, and barely glanced at her route plan before stamping the paperwork and wishing her a good trip. Eleanor appreciated the lack of fuss. She was tired of well-meaning rangers who questioned whether a woman should be hiking alone, as if gender somehow determined competence in the backcountry. The trail started with a steep climb through Jeffrey pine and red fir, gaining 2,000 feet of elevation in the first 3 miles. Eleanor settled into the rhythm of hiking, her breathing steady, her legs strong from months of training. By noon, she had reached the ridgeline and paused to eat lunch while gazing out at a landscape of granite peaks and alpine lakes stretching to the horizon. She made camp that evening beside a lake at 9,200 feet, exactly where her itinerary indicated. The water was crystal clear and cold enough to make her gasp when she washed her face. She filtered water for dinner, pitched her tent on a flat spot cushioned with pine needles, and hung her food bag from a branch to keep it away from bears. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Eleanor felt the familiar sense of peace that only came from being completely alone in the wilderness. She woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of music. At first, she thought she was dreaming. But as she came fully awake, she realized the sound was real. Someone was playing music, something tinny and distant, like an old radio. And there were voices, multiple voices talking and laughing, echoing across the lake. Eleanor unzipped her tent and looked out. Through the trees on the opposite side of the lake, approximately 200 yards away, she could see the glow of a campfire. A large campfire, much bigger than any responsible camper would build, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. Her first reaction was annoyance. She had hiked 8 miles into the backcountry specifically to avoid other people, and now someone was having what sounded like a party in the middle of the wilderness. Her second reaction was confusion. She had not passed anyone on the trail. The lake she had chosen was off the main road, accessible only by a faint used trail that most hikers missed. The chance of another group, independently, choosing the same remote location was extremely small. Eleanor sat in her tent for several minutes, debating what to do. The noise was not terribly loud, and complaining would require hiking around the lake in the dark, which seemed both dangerous and antisocial. She decided to ignore it, pulled her sleeping bag over her head to muffle the sound, and tried to go back to sleep. But sleep would not come. The music continued, and the voices grew louder, more animated. She could not make out words, but the tone suggested people having a good time, drinking perhaps, celebrating something. The responsible part of Eleanor's brain worried about fire safety. That blaze looked large enough to spread if someone was not careful. And if they were drinking, they might not be careful. Finally, at 3:45 a.m., Eleanor made a decision. She would walk over there, politely ask them to keep it down and make sure their fire was contained, and then return to her tent. 5 minutes of awkwardness in exchange for peace and safety. It seemed reasonable. She pulled on her hiking boots, grabbed her headlamp and bear spray, and started around the lake. The night was clear, the moon nearly full, providing enough light to navigate without much difficulty. The lake shore was rocky in places, requiring careful foot placement, but Eleanor was confident in her abilities. As she approached the source of the light and sound, she noticed something odd. There was no used trail leading to this campsite. In fact, the forest here was dense and untouched, no evidence that humans had ever passed through. But the campfire glowed ahead, and the music continued, and the voices laughed and called to each other. Eleanor pushed through a screen of manzanita bushes and emerged into a clearing. What she saw made no sense. The campsite was fully established, as if people had been there for days. There were 4 large tents arranged in a semicircle, each easily big enough for 2 or 3 people. Camp chairs were set up around a stone fire ring containing a roaring fire. A folding table held cooking equipment, coolers, lanterns. Clothes hung from a line strung between trees. The radio sat on a rock, playing classic rock from the 1980s. But there were no people. The campsite was completely empty. Eleanor stood at the edge of the clearing, her headlamp sweeping across the scene, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The fire burned. The music played. But nobody was there. "Hello?" Eleanor called out, her voice tentative. "Is anyone here?" No response. She walked closer to the fire, feeling its heat against her skin. This was no illusion. The flames were real. She approached the nearest tent and called out again. Nothing. She unzipped the entrance and shined her light inside. The tent was fully furnished with sleeping bags laid out, pillows positioned, personal items scattered around. She saw a book lying open, as if someone had just been reading it. A pair of hiking boots placed neatly at the foot of a sleeping bag, a flashlight, a water bottle. Everything looked recently used, arranged by people who intended to return. Eleanor checked the other tents. All the same. Fully equipped, recently occupied, but empty. She returned to the fire ring and examined the table more closely. There were plates with food still on them, half-eaten sandwiches, an open bag of chips, drinks in cans that were still cold to the touch. Someone had been eating here recently, perhaps within the last few minutes. Her rational mind searched for explanations. Maybe everyone had gone for a night hike together. Maybe they were skinny dipping in the lake. Maybe there was an emergency and they all ran off to help someone. But none of these explanations felt right. Who leaves food out in bear country? Who leaves a fire unattended? Who abandons their campsite completely in the middle of the night? Eleanor felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Something was deeply wrong here. She backed away from the fire, her eyes scanning the tree line, expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. But the forest remained still and silent, except for the crackling of the fire and the music from the radio. She was turning to leave when she noticed the photographs. They were in frames, several of them, propped up on rocks near the fire. Eleanor approached and picked one up. It showed a group of 5 people, 3 men and 2 women, all in their 20s or 30s, smiling at the camera. They were dressed in hiking clothes, standing in front of a tent. The photograph looked old, the colors slightly faded, the fashion of the clothing dated. Eleanor picked up another frame. Same group of people, different pose. She looked at the dates written on the backs of the photos. 1982. All of them were dated 1982. Her blood turned to ice. These photographs were 37 years old. But the food on the plates was fresh. The fire was burning. The sleeping bags were laid out as if someone had just been using them. Eleanor looked at the radio more closely. It was an old model, the kind with an actual cassette player, something from the 1980s. But it was playing, the music clear and loud. Eleanor ran. She crashed through the bushes, not caring about the noise, not caring about stealth, driven by pure instinct to get away from that impossible campsite. She stumbled over roots, branches tearing at her clothes and skin, her headlamp beam bouncing wildly. Behind her, the music abruptly stopped. Then every single tent collapsed simultaneously, as if someone had pulled all the stakes at once. She heard the whoosh of fabric falling, the clatter of poles hitting the ground. Eleanor did not stop running until she reached her own campsite. Her hands shook so badly she could barely work the zippers on her pack, but she managed to stuff everything inside. Tent, sleeping bag, food, equipment. Everything went into the pack in a jumbled mess. She did not care about organization. She just needed to leave. She needed to be away from this place, away from the impossible campsite and the photographs from 1982 and the fire that burned for nobody. She hiked out in darkness, following her GPS track, moving as fast as the terrain allowed. When she reached the trailhead at 6:30 a.m., she drove directly to the ranger station without stopping to rest. The ranger on duty listened to her story with growing concern. When Eleanor described the location using her GPS coordinates, the ranger pulled up a map and marked the spot. Then she picked up a phone and made several calls. 20 minutes later, a search and rescue team was being assembled. Eleanor waited at the station, drinking coffee someone had pressed into her hands, her body still trembling with adrenaline. The search team returned that afternoon. They had found nothing. No campsite, no fire ring, no evidence that anyone had been at those coordinates. The forest was undisturbed, thick with undergrowth, showing no signs of human passage. "You are sure about the location?" the ranger asked Eleanor gently. "I have GPS coordinates," Eleanor said, pulling out her phone. But when she tried to show them the marked location, she found that her GPS track had somehow corrupted. The data from the previous night was gone, replaced with static and error messages. The ranger was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled a file from her desk and laid it open. "In 1982, she said slowly, 5 campers disappeared from this area. They were found 1 month later, but not all of them. Their campsite was completely intact, as if they had simply vanished mid-activity. Fire still had coals, food was laid out, personal belongings were all there. But the people were gone." Eleanor looked at the report. There were photographs clipped to the file. Photographs of the search, of the abandoned campsite, of the missing persons. And there, in one of the photos, she saw the same group of people from the framed pictures she had seen by the fire. The same 5 young people who had been smiling at the camera. "They never found all 5, Eleanor whispered. The ranger shook her head. "They found 3 bodies eventually, scattered in the wilderness. Exposure, they said. But 2 of them were never recovered. And people who camp in that area sometimes report strange things. Campfires that vanish, music playing where no one is, voices in the dark." Eleanor drove home that day and did not return to the mountains for 8 months. When she finally did go camping again, she chose a different range, hundreds of miles away. But sometimes, late at night, she wonders what she saw beside that lake. Was it a memory echoing through time? A loop replaying endlessly? The spirits of people still camping, still cooking dinner, still laughing around a fire, unaware that they died decades ago? She will never know. But Eleanor has learned to trust her instincts about places that feel wrong, about moments that should not exist, about the thin places where the past and present overlap in ways that human minds were never meant to witness. Natalie and Joshua had been best friends since the 3rd grade. They had grown up on the same street in Portland, Oregon, spent summers riding bikes and building forts, and somehow managed to maintain their friendship through high school, college, and into their early 20s, when most childhood friendships faded into occasional social media likes. Their bond was strengthened by a shared tradition that started when they were both 19. Every summer, they would take a camping trip together to a new location, documenting their adventures on a travel blog they had started as a joke, but which had somehow accumulated a modest following. This was their 7th annual trip, and they had chosen northern Minnesota, an area known for its pristine wilderness and countless lakes. They had spent weeks researching the perfect location, looking for something remote but accessible, beautiful but challenging. They settled on a peninsula that jutted into a lake 40 miles from the nearest town, accessible by a 5-mile hike through dense forest. They arrived at the trailhead on a Thursday afternoon in late August. The parking area was empty except for their rental car. Joshua checked the permit box and found no other permits issued for that area in the past week. Perfect solitude, exactly what they wanted. The hike was easier than expected. The trail was well maintained for the first 3 miles, then degraded into a faint path marked by occasional cairns. They reached the peninsula by late afternoon and immediately understood why this spot had such good reviews online. The land extended into the lake like a finger, offering water on 3 sides and a small beach perfect for swimming. The forest came right up to the rocky shore, providing shade and privacy. "This is perfect," Natalie said, dropping her pack. "We should stay here forever." "At least 3 days," Joshua agreed. "Let me check for bear signs before we set up camp." While Joshua scouted the perimeter, Natalie began unpacking their gear. She was laying out the tent when something caught her eye. Trees along the tree line had marks carved into them, symbols that looked deliberate but meant nothing to her. They were crude, cut deep into the bark, and they formed a pattern that seemed to encircle the entire peninsula. "Josh," she called, "come look at this." Joshua examined the carvings, running his fingers over the weathered cuts. "Trail markers, maybe? Though I have never seen ones like this." "They go all the way around," Natalie said. "I followed them. It is like a circle with this peninsula in the middle." Joshua shrugged. "Old hunting signs, probably, or property markers from before this became parkland. People have been in these woods for generations." They set up camp as the sun began to set, pitching their 2-person tent near the center of the peninsula with a clear view of the lake in 3 directions. Joshua built a fire ring from stones and started a small blaze. They cooked dinner, took photographs for their blog, and settled in to watch the stars emerge. Around midnight, they heard splashing in the lake. It was rhythmic, deliberate, not the random sound of fish jumping or birds landing. Splash, pause, splash, pause, splash, coming from the darkness beyond their firelight. Joshua grabbed a flashlight and aimed it toward the water. The beam swept across the lake's surface, illuminating nothing but gentle waves. The splashing stopped immediately. They waited, listening, but heard only the normal sounds of night: insects, distant loons, wind through the trees. "Probably a beaver," Joshua said, though he did not sound convinced. They went to bed an hour later, both feeling vaguely uneasy, though neither wanted to admit it. Natalie lay in her sleeping bag, listening to Joshua's steady breathing beside her, and tried to ignore the feeling that something was watching them from the darkness beyond their tent. She woke to find morning sun streaming through the tent fabric and Joshua already up. making coffee over a rebuilt fire. Everything looked normal in daylight, beautiful even, with mist rising off the lake and birds singing in the trees. "Our food bag is down," Joshua said when she emerged, "but nothing is torn. It was untied, not chewed through." They examined the bag together. Joshua had hung it properly, using the counterbalance method that made it impossible for bears to reach. Yet somehow it had been lowered to the ground, the rope untied in a way that required human-level dexterity. The food inside was scattered, but not eaten. Joshua circled the tree where the bag had hung, studying the ground. "There are tracks here," he said quietly. "Come look." Natalie knelt beside him. The mud near the tree showed clear impressions, 5-toed prints that looked almost human but were too long, too narrow, with claw marks at the tips of each toe. And they were large, easily twice the size of Joshua's footprint. "What animal makes tracks like that?" Natalie asked. "I do not know," Joshua admitted. "Should we leave?" They debated for an hour. In daylight, with sun warming their skin and the lake sparkling blue before them, the previous night's unease seemed foolish. They decided to stay, but agreed to take watches during the night, to keep the fire burning, to stay alert. The day passed without incident. They swam, read books, napped in the sun. But as darkness fell again, tension returned. They kept the fire blazing higher than necessary, burning through their firewood faster than planned. Natalie took the first watch, 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. Joshua went to the tent, but she knew he was not sleeping. Could hear him shifting position every few minutes. She sat by the fire, feeding it constantly, her eyes scanning the tree line. At 11:30, she saw movement across the lake. A figure stood on the opposite shore, perfectly still, watching their campfire. It was too dark to make out details, just a silhouette darker than the surrounding darkness. It did not move, did not acknowledge her stare. Just watched. "Josh," Natalie called softly. "There is someone over there." Joshua emerged from the tent and looked where she pointed. "I do not see anything." "Right there, by that dead tree. A person standing." She stopped. The figure was gone. "It was there, I swear." Joshua took over at 1 a.m. Natalie retreated to the tent but could not sleep. She lay there staring at the tent ceiling, listening to the fire crackle and Joshua moving around outside. At 2:30 a.m., she heard his voice, tight with fear. "Natalie, do not freak out. But there is something circling our camp." She was out of the tent in seconds. Joshua stood by the fire, his flashlight sweeping the tree line. Natalie could hear it now. Footsteps in the forest, just beyond the reach of firelight. Slow, deliberate steps moving around them, staying at a constant distance. "What is it?" she whispered. "I do not know. It started about 15 minutes ago. It just keeps circling." Joshua walked toward the sound, his flashlight extended. The footsteps stopped. He took another step. The footsteps started again, but now they were behind him, as if whatever was making them had moved impossibly fast. Joshua ran back to the fire. They stood together, back to back, trying to watch all directions at once. The footsteps continued, patient and methodical, circling endlessly. Sometimes they heard breathing, deep and rasping. Sometimes branches would crack, suggesting something large moving through the undergrowth. They did not sleep. They kept the fire burning and waited for dawn. When light finally broke over the lake, the sound stopped. They packed their belongings in silence, their hands shaking from exhaustion and fear. As they collapsed the tent, Natalie found the tracks, fresh prints in the soft earth. completely encircling where their tent had stood. Whatever had made them had stood outside while they slept, watching them for extended periods based on the depth of the impressions. But worse were the offerings. Small items had been placed around their campsite during the night. Things they had not brought. Animal bones arranged in patterns, wildflowers tied with grass, smooth stones stacked in tiny cairns, each placed carefully, deliberately, while they had been mere feet away. "We are leaving," Joshua said, "right now." They started hiking back at 7 a.m., moving faster than was wise on the rough trail. 2 miles in, Natalie heard something moving parallel to them, staying just out of sight in the dense forest. She could hear branches breaking, bushes rustling, keeping pace with them. "Josh," she said quietly, "we are being followed." They walked faster. The sounds kept pace. Joshua started jogging, and Natalie matched him. Whatever was following them also increased its speed, now making no effort to hide its presence. Joshua stopped suddenly and yelled into the forest, "We are leaving. We did not mean to disturb you. We are sorry." The words sounded absurd, but he could not think of what else to do. They waited, breathing hard, listening. The following stopped. Complete silence settled over the forest. Then they heard a voice, female, speaking from the trees in a language that was not quite words, but somehow understandable. "The marked place is not for you. The water is not for you. The offering is not enough." Natalie and Joshua ran. They crashed through underbrush, abandoned the trail, moving in what they hoped was the right direction. Branches tore at their faces and arms. They fell, got up, kept running. They did not stop until they burst out of the forest and saw their car in the parking area. They drove to the nearest town and went directly to a gas station. The old man behind the counter took one look at their scratched faces and torn clothes and frowned. "Where were you camping?" he asked. Joshua described the location. The man's expression darkened. "That peninsula. You should not camp there. Nobody should." "Why not?" Natalie demanded. "What is out there?" The old man was quiet for a long moment. "The Ojibwe consider that land sacred. There is a spirit in the lake, they say. The forest around it is her territory. White settlers tried to build a resort there back in the 50s. 3 construction workers died in accidents within a week. Project was abandoned. Since then, locals know to stay away." "Why is it not posted?" Joshua asked. "Why are camping permits issued?" The man shrugged. "Federal land. Park Service do not believe in spirits. But the people who have lived here for generations, we know better. That land rejects those who do not belong." Natalie and Joshua drove back to Portland the next day. Their camping trip cut short. Both experienced nightmares for months afterward. In the dreams, they stood at the edge of the lake, while something beneath the surface called their names in that same not-quite language they had heard in the forest. They never took another camping trip together. The tradition that had defined their friendship for 7 years ended without discussion, both of them understanding that something had changed during those 2 days in Minnesota. Years later, Natalie researched the area online and found references to disappearances. A teenage couple in 2003, a solo hiker in 2011. Both last seen heading toward that peninsula, neither ever found. She sometimes wonders if the offerings they found were from other campers, other people who had been warned by something that lived in those woods. And she wonders what would have happened if they had stayed another night. If they had not run when they did, if they had not apologized to whatever was watching them from the darkness. Some questions, she has learned, are better left unanswered. Andrew had worked as a park ranger in Colorado for 5 years, and during that time, he had come to understand that his job was far more complex than most people realized. Yes, he enforced regulations and maintained trails and educated visitors about wildlife safety. But the part of his work that mattered most, the part that kept him in a job that paid poorly and demanded long hours in harsh weather, was the human element. He was often the first person to notice when someone was in trouble, the first to recognize when a visitor needed help they had not asked for. It was late September, the tail end of tourist season, when the woman walked into the ranger station just before closing time. Andrew was finishing paperwork, already mentally planning his drive home, when she entered. She was probably in her mid-20s, wearing expensive hiking gear that looked brand new, as if she had purchased everything specifically for this trip. Her hands shook slightly as she filled out the backcountry permit application. "Planning to camp alone?" Andrew asked, keeping his tone casual and professional. The woman looked up sharply, her eyes flashing with irritation. "Is that a problem?" "Not at all," Andrew said quickly. "I just need to know for the permit. How many people in your group?" "One. Just me." Her voice was clipped, defensive. Andrew processed her permit, noting that she had requested one of the most remote campsites in the park, a location that required a 6-mile hike through difficult terrain. "This site is pretty isolated," he said gently. "Are you experienced with backcountry camping?" "I can handle myself," the woman snapped. "Is there anything else, or can I go?" Andrew wanted to ask more questions. Her defensiveness seemed excessive. Her body language screamed distress, and something about the situation felt wrong. But she was an adult. She was not breaking any rules, and he had no authority to stop her. He handed over her permit. "Have a safe trip," he said. "And remember, if you need anything, we monitor emergency channels 24 hours. The woman, her permit said her name was Lily, did not respond. She took the paperwork and walked out without looking back. Andrew watched her drive away and felt uneasy. He mentioned the encounter to his supervisor, who shrugged. "Lots of people come to the wilderness to be alone," she said, "especially after trauma or loss. Give her space." But Andrew could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. He checked the permit log and found that Lily had visited the ranger station 3 times in the past week, each time asking about the most isolated areas of the park, places where nobody would disturb her. Each ranger who had helped her noted that she seemed agitated and rude. 2 days later, Andrew was on patrol when he decided to check on her. He told himself it was standard procedure, that rangers frequently checked on solo campers in remote locations. But truthfully, he was worried. He hiked the 6 miles to her designated campsite and found her there, sitting by a small fire, staring into the flames. She looked terrible. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she had not slept. Her hair was tangled. When she saw Andrew approaching, her expression shifted from surprise to something that might have been relief. "I am sorry," she said before Andrew could speak. "I was rude to you at the station. I did not mean to be." Andrew sat down across the fire from her, maintaining a respectful distance. "It is okay," he said. "Bad day?" Lily laughed bitterly. "Bad 3 months." She was quiet for a moment. Then the words started pouring out as if a dam had broken. Her younger brother had died by suicide in June. She had been the one to find him. She blamed herself for missing the warning signs, for being too busy with her own life to notice he was struggling. The grief was unbearable. She could not sleep, could not eat, could not stand being around people who offered sympathy but did not understand. Andrew listened without interrupting. He had learned that sometimes people did not need advice or solutions. They just needed someone to witness their pain. That is why I came here, Lily said. To get away from everyone. From the questions and the pity and the constant reminders that he is gone. And I could not save him. They talked for nearly an hour. Andrew shared his own experience of loss. His sister had died of cancer when Andrew was 19. He remembered the helplessness, the anger at himself for not being able to do more, the guilt that came with being the one who survived. He told Lily that grief was not something you got over, but something you learned to carry. As he stood to leave, Lily asked him a question that made his blood run cold. If someone stayed in the park after their permit expired, she said carefully, if they did not come back when they were supposed to, how long before anyone would search for them? Andrew felt understanding settle over him like ice water. He sat back down and looked directly into her eyes. Lily, are you planning to hurt yourself? She did not answer immediately. Tears ran down her face. I do not know how to keep doing this, she whispered. Waking up every day knowing he is gone, knowing I failed him, it is too much. Andrew made a decision in that moment. He called his supervisor and said he would not be coming back that night, that he had encountered a situation that required his presence. Then he sat with Lily, and they talked until the fire burned down to embers. He talked about his sister, about the darkest moments after her death, when he also had not wanted to continue. He talked about how grief changes over time, how it never truly goes away, but becomes part of who you are, rather than something that destroys you. Your brother would not want this, Andrew said gently. He would not want his death to cause yours. How do you know? Lily asked bitterly. You did not know him. No, Andrew agreed. But I know that people who love us, even when they are struggling with their own pain, do not want us to suffer because of them. Your brother was in pain so deep, he could not see any other way out. But if he could have seen the future, if he could have known how his death would affect you, I believe he would have chosen differently. Lily cried for a long time. Andrew kept the fire going and waited. Eventually she asked, how do you do it? How do you keep going? One day at a time, Andrew said. Some days are harder than others, but you find reasons. Small things at first, then bigger things. And eventually, you realize you owe it to the people you have lost to live well, to honor their memory by surviving. The next morning, Andrew hiked out with Lily. She was quiet but seemed steadier. He drove her to the nearest town and connected her with crisis counselors. She agreed to check into a facility that specialized in grief counseling and trauma recovery. 3 days later, Andrew received a call. Lily's permit had expired, but she had not checked out. He explained the situation to his supervisor, who contacted the counseling center. Lily was safe, had voluntarily admitted herself for treatment, and had asked them to thank the ranger who had talked to her. Over the following year, Andrew received occasional letters from Lily. She wrote about her recovery, about the hard work of processing grief, about learning to forgive herself for things that were never her fault. She thanked him repeatedly for seeing her pain, for asking the hard questions, for caring whether she lived or died. In one letter she wrote, "You saved my life that day. Not because you stopped me from doing something terrible, though maybe you did, but because you reminded me that I mattered, that someone cared whether I existed or not. In that moment, when I felt most alone, you showed me kindness, and that kindness was enough to make me want to try one more day." Andrew kept her letters in his locker at the ranger station. He thought about her often, especially during training sessions for new rangers when he told them about the human side of the job, about watching for signs that someone was struggling, about asking uncomfortable questions, about recognizing when enforcing rules was less important than saving a life. He thought about all the campers he had encountered over the years, the ones who came to the wilderness seeking solitude or healing or escape. He wondered how many of them had been standing at their own edges, literal or metaphorical, waiting for someone to notice, someone to care enough to ask if they were okay. The story could have ended tragically. If Andrew had not followed his instincts, if he had not checked on Lily, if he had not asked the difficult question about her intentions, she might have become another statistic, another missing person report, another search and rescue operation that ended in recovery rather than rescue. But because one person paid attention, because one person recognized pain beneath anger, because one person was willing to sit by a campfire and share his own vulnerability, Lily got a second chance. She got the opportunity to discover that grief, while devastating, was not insurmountable. That life, even with loss, still held meaning and purpose and moments of unexpected joy. Andrew learned something important during those hours by the fire with Lily. His job was not really about protecting the wilderness or managing resources or enforcing regulations. Those things mattered, certainly, but they were secondary to the real purpose: protecting people. Sometimes that meant rescuing someone from a cliff, or treating a snakebite, or helping a lost hiker find the trail. But sometimes it meant recognizing when someone was asking for help in the only way they knew how, when their rudeness was masking desperation, when their questions about isolation were really questions about whether anyone would notice if they disappeared. Years later, when Andrew thought about that September evening, he remembered Lily's tears reflecting firelight, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea he had made from supplies in his pack, her voice breaking as she admitted how close she had come to giving up. He remembered feeling inadequate, worried that his words were not enough, that his own experience with grief could not possibly help someone else's pain. But he had been enough. His presence, his willingness to listen, his honest sharing of his own darkest moments. These simple acts of human connection had been enough to pull someone back from the edge. And that, Andrew believed, was what it truly meant to be a ranger. Not just protecting the land, but protecting the people who came to it, seeking something they could not find in their regular lives. Sometimes they sought beauty or adventure or solitude, but sometimes they sought an ending, and Andrew's job was to help them find a beginning instead.